Continuing to look at the fascinating book of Daniel. Really, he is such a character. And the book of Daniel is very easy to divide up into two sections. The first 6 chapters, which we have covered. The first 6 chapters are narrative, or you might just call them historical. The stories, and you get to know who this Daniel was. Fascinating character, again, not only in the eyes of Israel, of the Jews, but even in Babylonian history. And we'll talk a little more about tonight, getting into the Persians and the the rise of this one named Cyrus or Darius. And so, chapter 6 kind of concludes the first section of the book as a whole. So we've covered half of the book, really. These last 6 chapters, chapters 7 through 12 here, the rest of the book will now turn to prophetical. No, not necessarily historical, but prophetical, and what it means for upcoming events, both in the days of Daniel and in our day, today. Prophecy has always had a kind of twofold fulfillment, where an immediate fulfillment, and we'll talk about how these come to pass immediately, not in the way that we think of it, but this really happened. That's why we titled chapter 2 of Daniel, The History of the World, because these things are laying out things that will take place even after Daniel, but before our time. So, kind of, Daniel didn't realize it, no doubt. He was speaking of things to come, upcoming events or future events. And even beyond that, because we still look ahead to many of these fulfillments. But you might just have as your introduction here to this prophetical section some homework assignment. And that's Daniel chapter 2, to review that again, as well as Revelation chapter 13 and Revelation chapter 17. There's some incredible parallels, incredible things that take place. We'll look at some of those tonight. Daniel chapter 2 and Daniel chapter 7, there's many things here that parallel, and also Revelation 13 and Revelation chapter 17. So, those kind of 4 chapters, if you will, you can discover all kinds of incredible hidden treasures if you look deep enough. But we'll actually make a parallel here with these first 8 verses. So, Daniel chapter 7, verse 1 says, "In the year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and visions of his head upon his bed. Then he wrote the dream and told the sum of the matters," or the main facts of the matters. Verse 2, "Daniel spoke and said, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the 4 winds of the heavens strove or blew upon the great sea." Now, the great sea has much to say. There's all kinds of controversy. What does the writer mean by the great sea? Well, there's kind of two, and speaking of prophecy, there's a twofold meaning to that, and that's the Mediterranean Sea, that literally there in the Mediterranean, many great and powerful kings have arisen from that area. But also we know from Revelation 17:15, in Revelation chapter 17, verse 15, the great sea is likened unto nations, tongues, peoples. people of the earth, we might just make it broad. So this is from the people of the earth or from the Mediterranean. I think it can mean both, just because of this area. But verse 3 goes on, 4 great beasts came up from the sea, diverse or different from one another. The first was like a lion, and he had eagle's wings. And I beheld till the wings thereof were plucked, and it was lifted up from the earth and made to stand upon the feet as a man. And a man's heart was given to it. And behold, another beast, a second, like to a bear. And it raised up itself on one side, and it had 3 ribs in the mouth of it, between the teeth of it. And they said thus unto it, Arise, devour much flesh. After this then I beheld, and lo, another beast, like a leopard, which had upon the back of it 4 wings of a bird, of a fowl, and the beast had also 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. And after this I saw the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible and strong exceedingly, and it had great iron teeth. It devoured and brake in pieces, and stamped the residue with the feet of it. And it was diverse from all the other beasts that were before it. And it had 10 horns. I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another little horn, before whom there were 3 of the first horns, plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things. So here you have the vision of Daniel, the dream of Daniel. And remember Daniel chapter 2, it was not Daniel, but Nebuchadnezzar. And it's interesting because there's 2 different perspectives. Remember the body with the head of gold, the arms of silver, the belly of brass, the legs of iron, and then you got to the feet with the 10 toes. Well, it's the same thing here in this chapter, only it's Daniel's perspective, and it's ultimately God's perspective of these kingdoms. Because I think the first beast speaks for itself. You could look through your archaeological digs, and you'll find what was the symbol for ancient Babylon. The flag, it was on the flags, it was on the gates, it was on their armor. A lion with wings as an eagle. There's very little debate, very little to kind of scratch your head and wonder, is this talking about Babylon? And of course, just as we mentioned in Daniel chapter 2, the head of gold didn't remain, although Nebuchadnezzar went and built a whole statue then out of gold, making the statement that, no, my kingdom will never be overthrown. But his kingdom was Babylon, and this is where Daniel didn't know that this was going to happen yet. But the lion with the wings of an eagle, by the way, those wings were plucked off. That speaks of Nebuchadnezzar being plucked up, if you will. Remember how full of pride he became, and yet his wings were taken off. He was then digging through the dirt, eating grass like a beast, right? So there's some similarities in how God humbled Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. And yet, they were overthrown. Babylon would be taken up by the arms. There's 2 arms. So you have the Medes and the Persians. And that's what this bear represents, the Medo-Persian Empire. So the lion, just like the head of gold, is Babylon. And the bear here is the Medo-Persian Empire, which, by the way, the three ribs that are between its teeth can speak of not only Babylon that it devoured and took over, Egypt as well as Lydia. And all the commentators really talk about these three ribs, which are mentioned there in verse 5, that are between the teeth of this bear that represents the Medo-Persian Empire. When the Medo-Persian Empire takes over Babylon, they must take over Egypt, as well as the Lydia, I don't know what you call them, I think it's Lydians, those in the area of Lydia. So those three ribs there speak of that, which bring us to the leopard in verse 6 that speaks of Greece, and ultimately Alexander the Great taking out the Medes and the Persians, who had 4 heads, 4 compadres, I don't know what you want to call them, officials, soldiers, right-hand guys. This leopard had 4 heads. God is so incredibly specific and detailed. It's amazing. He knew before Alexander would even be born, before the Grecian armies would ever come along, that there would be 4 generals that basically divide the kingdom after Alexander the Great, who died very young. These 4 generals, these 4 heads, kind of there with him. But there's another interesting side to this whole thing. Because after saying all of that, you get to this 4th and final beast. That is, Daniel says, I can't liken this to anything. It's just terrible, and it's incredibly strong, exceedingly. Verse 7, he saw this 4th beast. He couldn't liken it to anything. And later he says it's different from all the others. So it's this one that way down in history is going to take place. And we know now that it's speaking of the Roman Empire, that anything that came in its way, it was devouring. It was rolling through. It was coming through teeth like iron. You can't mess with the Roman Empire, which ultimately took out everything in front of it and brought about the 10 toes, the 10 horns, this 10-nation confederation that's going to come and rise, just like in, the 10 toes. Back in Daniel chapter 2, speak of those 10-nation confederation that will rise and be those that come along after. So maybe you've heard the term before, the little horn of Daniel. We'll come back to that a little bit as the chapter progresses. We see more on that horn, the little horn that's mentioned in verse 8. But I love back-to-back reading Daniel chapter 7, verse 1 through 8, just like we read. But now let's turn, if you will, to Revelation chapter 13, and you'll see what I mean. And if anything else, it'll keep you awake. Revelation chapter 13. And just turn there and you'll see what I mean. Keeping in mind, keeping a finger back in Daniel 7, keeping in mind what we just read, didn't we? I hope some of you are reading along. So, Revelation chapter 13, I stood upon the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his head the name of blasphemy. Verse 2 of Revelation chapter 13. And the beast which I saw was like a leopard, and his feet were like the feet of a bear, and his mouth was as the mouth of a lion. Sound familiar? Did we just read about these beasts that rise up out of the sea? And the dragon gave him his power and his seat and great authority. So, and that we know from Revelation chapter 13, just those few verses is all we'll read there, but we know that what ultimately that's referring to in Revelation 13, especially if you were with us Thursday nights when we were going through the book of Revelation, that's very clearly speaking of Antichrist. Which again, these rulers, these kings, these four beasts are all Antichrist. There's a spirit of Antichrist that's now at work. It's been at work. And so, interesting how God's Word is always, well, it just harmonizes with everything. These were used, and once we get to Daniel chapter 10, probably the most eerie, kind of creepy chapter in Daniel, because we talk a lot about spiritual warfare. We know very little about it. And it's not, what so many of us think sometimes. There's much behind all of these nations, these kings, these in authority that rise and fall, just as we read earlier in Daniel chapter 2. It's worth revisiting. God sets up kings and he takes down kings. And sometimes he uses the enemy, Antichrist. He uses Satan himself. Remember the king of Tyre. All of these different spiritual aspects to what we're looking at. So verse 9, otherwise back to Daniel chapter 7. Verse 9 will never finish if I don't keep going here. But this is always fascinating me, all of these beasts. Another thing that you'll see is people trying to draw pictures of these things always come up short. Because what is this really signifying? They're not literal heads, four heads on a leopard. They're not literal pictures of these things. And so it always falls short because, especially when you look back and say the lion with the wings like an eagle became so significant as they discover, in our day now, looking back, that was clearly Babylon. That was clearly just as over and over, archaeology, history itself proves this to be true. The Word of God. And so, sometimes we can get caught up in trying to visualize all of these things. And I get it. You kind of want to see what that would look like. But remember, this is a vision, a dream. God is permitting, if you will, Daniel to write this down. And he's speaking through Daniel's dreams and visions. But it's in the canon. He's going to be told to seal these things up, isn't he? Why is that? Because not every dream is significant. Not every vision is from God and should be taken like the book of Daniel should be taken. So keep that in mind. Verse 9. I beheld then till the thrones were cast down. And I love this phrase. The Ancient of Days did sit, whose garment was white as snow, and hair of his head like the pure wool. His throne was like the fiery flame, and his wheels as burning fire. A fiery stream issued and came forth from before him. Thousands ministered unto him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The judgment was set, and the books were opened. I beheld then, because of the voice of the great words, which the horn, which horn? The little horn, and I mentioned, we'll talk more about this little horn. The horn spake, and I beheld even till the beast was slain, and his body destroyed and given to the burning flame. As concerning the rest of the beasts, they had their dominion taken away, yet their lives were prolonged for a season and time. So verse 9 through 12 there, is really a vision of the Ancient of Days, and more specifically, we should be remembering Revelation chapter 20, where we read, the books were opened. At least this time around when I'm reading through verses 9 through 12 there of Daniel 7, that hit me like a ton of bricks. Yeah, Daniel's looking forward even further than the Medes and the Persians, the Greek Empire, the Romans that would come ultimately. He's looking even further to Revelation 20, verse 11, where we read, the books will be opened. But just like we talked about when we were in Revelation 20, which wasn't too long ago, when we talked about an open book test, and how when the books, plural, the books are opened, it won't matter if you're written in the book of the Lamb. Why? Because you're covered by the blood of the Lamb. That's the only book that matters, the book of life. So when the books are open, it won't matter if your name is written in the book of life. And also, notice who's standing before him. The horn is Antichrist. The beasts. And we saw there's going to be kind of this false trinity, remember in Revelation, of the false prophet, the dragon, Satan himself, and the beast and Antichrist. This kind of false trinity that shows up. They will all be judged, all be dealt with, as well as those in the world that will stand before him. Had to write this down in my notes because I could get caught up. But at the end of the millennial kingdom, in Revelation 20, verse 11, well, let's turn over to Revelation 20. I said that Daniel and Revelation go hand in hand. They really do. You cannot understand parts of Daniel without Revelation and vice versa. You have to have a good grasp on Revelation, or Daniel and Revelation. So Daniel chapter 20, verse 11. And I saw a great white throne. You guys have heard of the great white throne judgment? That's what this is. In Revelation 20, verse 11. I saw a great white throne and him who sat upon it, from whose face the earth, the heaven fled away, and there was found no place for them. And I saw the dead, small and great, stand before God. And here it is, and the books were opened, verse 12. But we're told, and another book was opened, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged out of those things which were written in the books, plural, according to their works. And the sea gave up their dead, which were in it. Death and hell delivered up the dead, which were in them. And they were judged, every man according to his works. And I love this. Death and hell were cast into the lake of fire. This is the second death. And whosoever was not found written in the book of life was cast in the lake of fire. This is a tragic and very sobering, a very serious verse, very serious chapter. Daniel's getting a glimpse way back in Daniel chapter 7 of this very moment. The books will be opened. And yes, this little horn will be dealt with. And ultimately, all 10 horns, that's the nations, those, even the rulers, both small and great, right? God's going to deal with every single one of them. And it's going to be tragic, yet it's going to be just and it's going to be right. There will be none to say, that's not fair, that's not right, God, you're being too harsh. No, none of that. And so, again, Revelation 20, verses 11 through 15, lining up, I think, beautifully with Daniel chapter 7, verses 9 through 12. Well, now we get to the vision of the Son of Man. Guess who this is? Just like you can guess who the Ancient of Days is. It's Jesus Christ. Which, by the way, is all over. It's all over the book of Daniel. It's all over the book of, we've talked about. You see Jesus just comes alive in all of these. So verse 13 now. I saw in the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man came with the clouds of heaven, and came to the Ancient of Days. And they brought him near before him, and there was given him dominion, glory, and the kingdom, that all people, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, and his kingdom that which shall not be destroyed. There is two aspects to the kingdom of Jesus Christ. And it's always fun to throw this out there to people because it's true. There is a temporary kingdom of Jesus Christ. Did you know that? It's called the millennial kingdom. We referred to it just before. What do I mean? There is an end to those 1,000 years, isn't there? And we don't get, make sure you get this, we don't get to 2 Peter chapter 3 verse 10. If you wonder what that says, 2 Peter 3:10 says it's all going to burn. We don't get to that until the end of the 1,000-year reign of Jesus Christ, where you and I will be with him as the bride of Christ, reigning and ruling. It's going to be an incredible time. But again, just mind-boggling. We will not see heaven and earth pass away until that temporary, if you will, temporal kingdom of Jesus Christ, his throne established here on earth. But until there's a new heaven and a new earth and New Jerusalem come down, then there will be his throne that will be established forever, and his enemies will be made his footstool. They'll be under his feet. They are now, but we know that, well, for a season, they've been given life, these dominions. Just verse 12 makes allusion to that. So, his dominion, he will be given glory, power, all nations, all tongues, they will serve him. And his kingdom will be an everlasting kingdom. It will never be destroyed. Jesus Christ. That's what the vision of the Son of Man. Did you know Jesus calls himself the Son of Man more than any other phrase in the Bible? This in Daniel is, and I really believe this is why my dad, this was his favorite book, the book of Daniel. Now he would quickly say, in the Old Testament. It's my favorite book in the Old Testament, not in the entire Bible. But one of the things is, Jesus tells you to be very familiar with something. We're going to get to that here in just a moment. But this is another key, this is another clue. Daniel uses this phrase, Son of Man. Ezekiel used it as well. Ezekiel was a companion to Daniel. But Daniel uses this phrase. Daniel, we're going to find out, is kind of set apart from the other prophets. He's called the beloved of God, by God himself. Jesus had one that he called the beloved. John, who wrote what? Revelation. Interesting. Daniel and Revelation go hand in hand, really. Incredible stuff. So, verse 15 though, I said I could be here all night. I, Daniel, was grieved in my spirit, in the middle of my body, and the visions of my head troubled me. I came near unto one of them that stood by and asked him the truth of all of this. What does all this mean? So, verse 16, he told me and made me know the interpretation of the things. These great beasts, are four kings, which shall arise out of the earth. Verse 18, but the saints of the Most High shall take the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever. even forever and ever. It's pretty awesome if you're a saint of the Most High. Might be worth noting that verse there. Well, verse 19, then I would know the truth of the fourth beast, which was different from all the others, exceeding dreadful, whose teeth were like iron, and his nails of brass, which devoured and brake in pieces and stamped the residue with his feet. Verse 20, and of the 10 horns that were in his head, and of the other which came up, and before whom 3 fell, even of that horn that had eyes and a mouth that spake very great things, whose look was more great than his fellows, or more stout than his fellows. Verse 21, I beheld, and the same horn made war with the saints, and prevailed against them, until the Ancient of Days came, and judgment was given to the saints of the Most High. And the time came that the saints possessed the kingdom. Thus, verse 23, he said, the fourth beast shall be the fourth kingdom upon the earth, which shall be diverse from all kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, and shall tread it down and break it in pieces. And the 10 horns out of the kingdoms are 10 kings that shall arise, and another shall rise after them. And he shall be diverse from the first. And he shall subdue 3 kings. And he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws, and they shall be given into his hand, until a time, times, and the dividing of times, or half a time. But, verse 26, the judgment shall sit, and they shall take away his dominion, to consume and to destroy it unto the end. And the kingdom and dominion and the greatness of their kingdom under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High, whose kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him. Hitherto is the end of the matter. As for me, Daniel, my cogitations, my thinking, was much troubled, and my countenance changed in me. But I kept the matter in my heart. In other words, I was overwhelmed. It blew my mind, everything that this angel was telling me. Just like if you read it, try to make sense out of every word, it's a little difficult. One thing we know is that this little horn, as I mentioned, is really referring to Antichrist. And he's going to come onto the scene and be loved by the world. The people of the earth are going to gobble everything this guy has to say. He's going to make a peace treaty. Many believe that that peace treaty will be made with Israel and Jerusalem, and will cause Israel to live and be at peace with her enemies. This is a thing that's baffled people for centuries, millennia. Why in the world can't we settle the matter in the Middle East? To this day, it's in the news all the time, isn't it? Used to not be so exciting because, well, for a Christian, before 1948, it wasn't that big a deal. Why? Because Israel wasn't established as a nation until 1948. And that's why we're excited, because we saw it take place. Jesus said, when you see the fig tree bloom, take heed. Make sure you look around, because your redemption draws near. But what this speaks of is in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, where we have further insight on this man who will come along, and the Bible calls him the son of perdition, the Antichrist. The little horn of Daniel is another term for this fella that's going to come onto the scene, and he's more stout than all his other fellows. He's going to come onto the scene. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, that's beginning about verse 3. Let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come except there be a falling away first, and that man of sin, another term for Antichrist, that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition, who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God. Did you catch that? This is why many believe and we don't know this, but that he will come from an Arab background. He will be Arabic, which is interesting, because the language that's used in Daniel chapter 2, and I mentioned this when we started, from Daniel chapter 2 to Daniel chapter 7 here, we just finished Daniel chapter 7, it will now go back to Hebrew, but it's written in Aramaic.
What was it again?
Daniel 2 through 7 is written in Aramaic. Chapters 2 through 7. God is going out of his way to say this is speaking of Gentiles and their rule and reign. Because the Medo-Persians, guess what? They're not Jewish. They're not of Israel. So normally in Bible history, again, Bible prophecy, I mean. Normally, it's always speaking of Messiah. It's always speaking of the nation Israel. What is to come of Israel? And it's still, I mean, there's prophecy upon prophecies about Jerusalem being the cup of trembling, and many prophecies that pertain to the nation of Israel. Daniel 7 and Daniel 2 are set apart. Why? Because they go into incredible detail about Gentiles and their nations and their ruling, their kingdoms. From the Medo-Persians, from Babylon, down the line to the Medo-Persians, and you could get into even further detail when we looked at those of Egypt. Well, really, Babylon, the roots go into Egypt. Those of Babylon is kind of the starting point. That's what Daniel, the history of the world, really. It starts with Babylon. Way back in Genesis 11. The root cause of this place, the Tower of Babel. So, we know that this guy's going to rise. Many, and I forgot to say that some say he will be of a European background. Don't quite know where they get that, why they go that route, but you can. I'm not interested. I won't be here. But we know that many are going to love this Antichrist, this little horn that will rise up and take great power, deceiving many. But like I said, he's going to answer all of the world's problems. He's going to have a slick answer. That phrase you might be sensitive to. Well, I call your attention to verse 25. He shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High to change times and laws, and they shall be given into his hands until times and half a times. This is why we know for the first 3.5 years it will be peace, prosperity. Boy, the economy is going to be booming. Everyone's going to be doing great. For 3.5 years, then guess what? And it's to the day. Revelation chapter, I don't know if I wrote that one down. In Revelation, it tells us it will be 42 months. It's the same amount of time, by the way. 3.5 years, 42 months. It's 1,260 days, if you were wondering. But he will rise up in the temple at that time, and claim to be God and demand to be worshipped as God. It's going to be right at that moment, 3.5 years into what we call the 7 years of tribulation. And really it's the whole Revelation, in Revelation chapters 6 through 19 is that whole 7-year period of time. And right smack dab in the middle of that time, 3.5 years, 42 months into it, Matthew chapter 25, Jesus refers to this, and I should have that memorized, but I don't. Matthew 25:32. This is what you want to be sensitive to. If Jesus Christ means everything to you, if what he expected his followers, his believers to know about, look at Matthew chapter 25 in verse 32. Before him shall be gathered from every nation, and he shall separate from one another, as a shepherd separates the sheep and the goats. He will judge the nations. Jesus Christ will. He says for us to know now that what Jesus Christ refers to as the abomination of desolation, spoken of by Daniel the prophet. Again, he expects me to know what that is. Matthew chapter 24. Matthew 24, verse 15. Where you therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet. Stand in the holy place and read and let him understand. He's referring to Antichrist standing in the holy place, demanding to be worshipped as God, and speaking against anyone or anything that claims to be God. That's every religion across the board, by the way. That's radical to think about. Today, somebody's standing in a holy place and basically away with Buddha, away with Allah, away with the God of Israel, the living God, away with any God. I alone stand here in the holy place and demand to be worshipped. That's what the abomination of desolation is. That's what it is. Jesus in Matthew 24:15, he expects you to know what that is. He expects me, anyone who claims to follow him, to know just what that is. And we're going to get more into that, especially when we get to Daniel chapter 9. Exciting stuff. This is just the setup. Really, the clarification. The visions will continue. The other thing is Daniel chapter 7 and chapter 8. Back to Daniel chapter 7. But in chapter 7 and chapter 8, we might want to make note that it starts, chapter 8 actually starts the same way. It's in the first year. Well, it's not the first. It's the chapter. Let me get back to Daniel. I'm lost. Hold on. Going all over the place. But Daniel chapter 7 starts with in the first year of Belshazzar. In chapter 8, it will be the third year of the reign of King Belshazzar. We need to be sensitive to that because it puts chapter 7 and chapter 8 when Belshazzar was still alive. Belshazzar is dead. Remember the handwriting on the wall? So the placement of time, don't miss that. The placement of time, it's about between, many put it between Daniel chapter 4 and chapter 5. So these visions that Daniel's seeing, these dreams that he's interpreting, it's during the time that Belshazzar is still alive. So it's actually between chapters 4 and 5. in there. I meant to start with that information, I'm sorry. But it's, again, God is using this guy, and one of the reasons I pointed that out is the prophecy that Peter in the New Testament quotes from Joel chapter 2, verse 28 and 29. Your old men will see visions, your young men will dream dreams. Daniel has both. God says, you're my guy. And he used Daniel as a young man, a teenager, set apart, not doing what everyone else was doing. Let's see if our countenance changes, how healthy we look if we don't partake of the king's meat and do everything that everyone else does. As a young man, Daniel did that. And then as an old man, we just looked at last week in Daniel chapter 6, he's an old man when he's put there in the lion's den. He's an old fella. And yet, in both instances, God uses him mightily. And it's the same for you, it's the same for me. God will use us in our young days, and he uses us in our old age. Made that connection this morning, too, with the book of Ruth. Ruth being a young woman, looking up to Naomi, listening to Naomi, being an older woman, and they both complemented one another, didn't they? Beautifully. And it really is a great picture of what the church was meant to be. And it's complementing one another, living it one in unity with one another, no matter how old, no matter how young, no matter what background we might be from. God uses us, each of us, individually in different ways, all because of his blood that was shed for us. We can now be one, brothers, sisters. The only reason I will not stand before him on that judgment day, because after you read something like Daniel 7, you realize he's very specific, isn't he? When it comes to the Medo-Persian Empire, when it comes to King Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonian Empire, and prophesying about these things. God is perfect. Not only in prophecy, telling things before they happen. It's why we should trust and obey everything that he says. It's perfect in every way. But his judgment, his justice is exact. That's why in some of the scriptures it will say exacting punishment, exacting judgment. It means he gives an eye for an eye, if you will. His judgment's perfect. And I cannot stand in perfect judgment. By the way, neither can you. Neither can any who stand before him. That's why I couldn't help but prepare to come to the table of the Lord. Because after you read something like the books being opened, we say, go ahead, open them, don't we? Because we have such hope. We have a Redeemer. We have the Redeemer. We have our Passover. We have our unleavened bread. We have every single feast in the festivals that we can read about and all throughout Leviticus fulfilled perfectly in the person of Jesus Christ, our hope, our living hope. So we want to respond in worship tonight in that way and come to his table. So let's do just that. Amen.